Hello makers, it's Jo here from Minerva if you've not met me before, and today we're going to do a tutorial on how to read a pattern. Reading a pattern used to be quite easy. When you first learnt to sew, you used a Big 4 pattern or a major pattern company, McCall's or Butterick or Simplicity, and all the patterns were the same and they followed the same format, and you soon learnt how to follow the pattern, follow the vocabulary and use the instructions. But now there are lots of different pattern companies and they all have their own variation of instructions, and some have different vocabulary and different markings depending on which country the pattern is from. Let me take you through some of the pattern markings and pattern instructions that you might need to know so that you can choose a wider range of patterns and styles. First of all, let's take a look at some patterns from the major pattern companies. When I use that phrase, I mean tissue patterns from New Look, Burda, Butterick, Simplicity, all of the patterns that you would associate coming in an envelope with the measurements and fabric requirements on the back, all in a neat packet with the tissue and the instructions. I'm going to use that phrase, major pattern company, and these are the patterns that I mean. Further on in the video, we're going to look at some indie patterns. So they're independent pattern houses, and I'll show you how some things differ in those if you've learnt to sew or are starting to sew with these and would like to move on to these, or vice versa. This is a glasses on off video for me because I'm going to be reading some of the pattern instructions for you. Historically, patterns had a drawing on the front to show you the styling of the pattern, and then on the back you would find a schematic drawing or technical drawing to show you the main shapes, and that's still the same on some patterns. But now we get photography so that we can see maybe the fit of the garment, we can see how much ease is in it, what sort of shapes it has, whether it has drop shoulders, whether it has fitted waists, and it gives you quite often on these a picture of all the views that are available when you buy this pattern. So you're getting a combination of a schematic on the front and a picture. I like that about it. Sometimes on an indie pattern I think I wouldn't choose it, and then I realised there was a short sleeve version or a tiered version or a version I didn't even know existed from the front cover. So that's a good thing about these major pattern companies. There is a number that you can reference, and it will also tell you a size on the front. Sometimes you get multi-size patterns, so you get a pattern that has a size range comes in one pack and another size range comes in another pack. So just be careful if you're ordering that you get the right size pattern. Any other information on the front? Sometimes you'll see if it's an easy style, an easy sew, so it might say make in an hour, or easy to sew, or sew up in a weekend, or something like that. So these haven't got that at the moment, so if you looked at these you wouldn't know how difficult it was to sew. What's on the back of the pattern? Let's take a look. So each pattern company is slightly different, but you'll get the main information in mostly the same places. So you'll have fabric suggestions here, so what sort of fabrics you can use to make this pattern, the different views and the sizing for each one, and how much fabric you need. This here is if you make shirt A and your fabric is 45 inches wide, this is how much fabric you would need depending on your size. If your fabric is 60 inches wide, then this is how much fabric you would need depending on your size. So be careful that you check on our description when you buy the fabric which one of those you are buying, and make sure that you buy the right amount of fabric. Down here you'll have notions. So notions means all the other things that you'll need to finish it: buttons, zips, hooks and eyes, cord, piping, bias binding, all of those sorts of things. And here on the outside of the packet are the finished garment measurements. So if you made a medium and you were a 38 to 40 inch chest, you can find out the finished garment measurements here. So the width would be 44 inches. It's a good guide, that, because if you're only just in this bracket, if you're only just 38 inches, you've got to decide if you want 6 inches of ease in your shirt or not. If not, you would go down a size, because if you were 38, you would have 2 inches of ease if you were in this one. So it's worth comparing this measurement to this measurement and checking whether you want a full fitting shirt or a fitted shirt. Here are the different views, and that's mostly the same information you'll get on all major patterning company pattern envelopes. Sometimes you might get some different information. So this one's giving you a description. So it's saying a loose fitting top or an A-line dress above the mid knee, has a back neck split. So it's giving you a little bit of information because you might not see that from the schematics below. So it's giving you a bit of information about the shape, the notions, the fabrics and the sizing as we talked about. On an indie pattern envelope, you might get some different information or less information, because sometimes it's more about the styling. So this is the Elodie wrap dress. From the front of here, it just says wrap dress. It's called Elodie. It's from Closet Core Patterns, and there are the 2 views as an illustration. And then on the back, you'll get some different information. On this one, you get bust, waist and hip measurements, the fabric requirements, the fabric type to choose and the notions, and these are the different views. So quite a small amount of information, but Closet Core Patterns have an information booklet inside where you'll on a Grainline Studio pattern you'll see a simple schematic. It tells you the name and it says here beginner, so that you know that's a beginner pattern, and it gives you a description of the top and its shape. On the back you get suggested fabrics. This one has technique, so that's quite good if you're a beginner and you want to know whether you can tackle this pattern. You want to know what techniques there are. So it says techniques involved include straight seams, applying bias, facing, setting sleeves and basic hemming. And it's got a little gauge of how difficult it is. And you've got the sizing, the fabric requirements and the finished garment measurements. Atelier Jupe, this is a European pattern company. This one's got quite limited information, so it says here it is, this is the company, and it's an L jumpsuit. It's got a difficulty rating there as 2 out of 4, so that's sort of an intermediate. It's really easy, this pattern, it's one of my favourites. And on the back it's got 2 languages, so you might just need to sort of read carefully. Got your sizes, the fabric and just a tiny bit of information about fabric type. In this pattern all of the pattern pieces are nested, so you will need to trace those patterns off. It does say on our website that, because it would be disappointing if you got this pattern, got it home and then realised you've got to trace it all off. So some you have to trace off. This one's tissue, this one's tissue, but they do differ with indie pattern companies. So this is Atelier and the Buttons pattern, this is Billy. So there's company name, name of the pattern, a little bit of information there, easy to follow, confident beginner. So that sometimes says a different phrase there, so it might be intermediate or experienced. Lots of information on the back, fabric suggestions, all the notions and supplies that you need, sizes, hip, bust and waist measurements and the fabric requirements. This is an I am pattern. This is also a European pattern, and this packet instructions doesn't have any details on at all. So it's gold on the back, see-through on the front, and actually the instructions are the front cover. So you get the company name, schematic of the drawing, and it says intermediate, and these are the instructions, and they're quite limited in a I am pattern. They assume that you've sewn before. Another company that assumes you've sewn before is a Style Arc pattern. Once I've cut mine I keep it in a plastic pocket. So you get a schematic, no photographs, and these are the instructions. On here you are just getting its medium it's a tunic and it's by Style Arc. All of the size information is worked out from the chart inside. So that's a quick tour of the outside. What happens when you get inside and you want to cut out the paper pieces and then start cutting your fabric? Let's take a look at the different styles of instructions that you get within patterns, the major pattern companies and some indie ones too. Before you dive into the number one, start making darts or adding shoulders, it's a good idea to read the first part of your instruction sheets, because there's a lot of hidden information in there that will help you along the way further along the pattern. If you're completely new to sewing, you might open that great big tissue piece out and think, well, I want to make these shorts, so which pieces do I need to cut out? So you need to find out, this is view B, and then you look for view B and it tells you which pieces to cut. So use pieces 1 and 2, and on the pattern piece will be a big number so you can find pattern piece 1 and 2. If you're going to make the trousers that are view A, then you will need pattern pieces 1, 2, 3 and 4. If you're going to make the skirt, you will need pattern pieces 3, 4 and 6. And that's how you select which pieces to cut out. There's a little explanation of some of the markings that I've just shown you, and it's also useful to know on the pattern, when you start to get into the instructions, which colour is the wrong side of the fabric and which is the right side, especially if you're new, because you'll maybe relying quite heavily on this illustration, and if you don't know which is the right side and the wrong side of your fabric, then you can't really orientate your work to copy it, and it doesn't actually become that useful. So you need to know which is the right side, which is the wrong side, which is the interface bit, if there is, and which is the lined bit, if there is. That's really useful. There are some stitch definitions, like a glossary there, and you'll also need to know what the seam allowance is. Now, this is the good thing about following major pattern company patterns is the right side is always grey, the wrong side is always white. The interface side always has little hashes on it, and the lining always has spots on it. The seam allowance is always 1.5 centimetres unless it's specified differently for a collar. So there's lots of things that are always the same. There's always a picture and a short instruction, and they always use the same language. This isn't the same when you buy an indie pattern, because those are written independently and they may be from different parts of the world where different language is used. Some might be in colour. Tilly and the Buttons instructions are in colour with colour photographs and are actually renowned for their exceptional instructions. There's a glossary in the front to help you with any stitches, and also there are tips, and sometimes there are links further to more complicated parts of the pattern to help you to learn a new technique. Atelier Jute patterns have a quite substantial booklet with them, and it'll feel like, wow, there's going to be loads of help in there, but actually all of that first part is in 2 different languages. But it's really well written once you get to the part that you need. Gives you lots of measuring information, finished garment measurements, layouts. This one's quite tricky in that from the pattern sheet you trace off your pieces, you don't just cut them out, and then you have to find here how many of them to cut. So there's like a pattern inventory, like a cutting inventory to follow. There's some simple diagrams and longer instructions. This one gives you lots of information about seam allowance, so it tells you each time what seam allowance to use. Same for closet core patterns, lots of information at the beginning, a glossary to help you get started, lots of pattern layouts to make sure you don't make a cutting error. There's quite a lot of information here about sewing French seams, doing a different seam, interfacing, binding. You can see this one has the same language for right side and wrong side, and really detailed instructions. Lots of referencing of pattern pieces. This is a style art pattern. This is an Australian company. This is a tunic, and the instructions are quite limited. They're text only, so they start here and they work their way down here. So they just use technical language. So for example, it might say, with right sides together, sew the inside collar stand to the neck, press the seam of the outer collar stand inward and pin to the neck. So you can see there's no picture to show that. You have to just follow that against your garment that you're sewing. There's often a few diagrams of some more tricky parts there. Look, it's the collar construction in pictures, and that will coincide with this, but not the same as the major pattern companies or the fuller instruction booklets. Instructions are written in different ways, but you need to just go through them really slowly. Sometimes taking a look another day will give you another take on it, and so you can be more successful once you've taken a little break. Read multi instructions in small chunks. So if it asks you to do one thing, then another thing, then another thing, all to put a collar on, just read the first bit, do that bit, then the next bit, and then the next bit. So you can break down multitask instructions into smaller chunks. Take your time when cutting out a garment, because at the cutting stage, that is where you'll be reading all of the pattern markings and making sure that you've cut the right amount of pieces. You're not going to run out of fabric and have to go back and cut another piece out because it said cut 4, not cut 2. I always used to do that with pockets. When I first started sewing, I would put a pocket piece down, cut 2, think that's a pocket for each side, but it isn't. I would always think, oh no, I've got to go and try and find another little bit of material. So take plenty of time at your cutting out stage, and that'll get your garment off to a good start. Once you've got your pattern and your fabric, you need to find out what size to cut, and that can also be a little bit tricky because we're sort of brainwashed into thinking that we're all a number, and that's from our ready-to-wear size, and we've maybe grown up and gone to the shops and bought clothes in different sizes, but really that is just a number. The most important thing if you are making your own garments is to take your own measurements and just don't even think of that number. Because we have on our website a mix of indie patterns and major pattern company patterns, they're all using different sizes. So some are from Europe, some are from America, some are from other countries where they're having different sizing standards. When you take your measurement, always take your upper bust measurement, because that will give you the best measurement for your shoulder shape and your body cage shape here and across your back. If you simply take a bust measurement, you will have, yes, it will fit your bust, but it might be hanging off your shoulders, it might be too tight across your shoulders. So you need to learn how to do a bust adjustment rather than just pick your bust size. The best thing to do is not think of yourself as a number, but just think, I need to take my measurements because I'm making an item for myself. If you make a profile on Minerva, you can share your makes, but you can also check out and follow other makers and find out how they're getting on with instructions. Quite often, people are quite honest about whether instructions were good, what they found good about them, what they found missing in it, or what they would have liked to have seen. So you can pick up some of the information that you might be missing from a Minerva maker. We would like you to become one of those Minerva makers, so do make an account for yourself. It's good to hear the experiences of people at a different sewing skill. You don't always want to hear from really experienced sewers. Sometimes you want to hear from a beginner because you're a beginner, and you can really relate to what they have to say. I hope that's helped you today. Hopefully it will help you to choose maybe a pattern that you've not chosen before, or it will help you to get through a pattern that you've got stuck on in the past. In the meantime, head over to Minerva and take a look at our inspirational makers projects, and also maybe have a look at some other tutorials and sew alongs on our video lists. Thank you very much for watching.